Hey everybody, this is Warren. Welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, make sure to subscribe so you can hit the notification bell and catch whenever these live streams go out. Today, we're going to be talking about how to read piano sheet music. And this is the process that I have used to teach every single one of my students to read sheet music, even from the very first lesson. And you can be a complete beginner at this. It works. Like I've done it for like over 10 years. Okay. Now, also do want to mention that you want to watch the other video because these two videos go hand in hand. Okay, so like the one before this was how to read individual piano music notes. So you're going to need to do a little bit of both to get completely fluent at reading sheet music. So remember with this one as well, like with most of my videos, it's like action first. Like you don't really need a whole lot of theory. You don't really read a lot of stuff before you get started. Just get started, and then the theory and all that stuff can come later. Now, let's talk about why people avoid sheet music to begin with. And just said it's theory, right? It's because people think you need to know a lot of theory before you begin. And this is just wrong. We're kind of brainwashed in school. It's like, where do you go to not get any real world experience? And that's school. And the thing is, there's no equation for sheet music. There's no like magic formula. Although I have a method, very specific steps and materials that I'll show you today, but you don't need to memorize any complicated stuff to get started with um, reading sheet music. And the reason why teachers do this, by the way, especially music teachers, like getting students to read music is they'll assign a ton of theory. They give you a ton of assignments because they don't know how. And this is kind of how when you think back then, none of this really existed. These method books, right? I'm kind of going off on the tangent, but if you follow like music history, this stuff didn't exist. This is kind of like a modern invention. Okay, so they've kind of been indoctrinated into this type of thinking. Plus, they just don't know a way. Like I'll show you my method. Like there are any music teachers out there like watching this, just use my method. It works. Okay, and if you don't want to use it, it just means you want to keep lying to yourself. But in any case, another thing is like theory, like homework assignments and things like that in school. It gives you certainty. Like you can do not a plus b, but like 1 + 1 = 2, right? Like it's easy to do homework assignments because the answers are simple. But learning is like life. There are no easy answers, and sometimes you do X and you end up doing Z. Okay, so the best way to think about it is just learning everything through trial and error. You're gonna make a lot of mistakes in the beginning, but remember, just learning mistakes, that's just information, highly useful information that you're learning to find a better approach. Okay. Now, other reason, this is not really music teachers, but I get these comments all the time on my other YouTube channel that they don't like they avoid playing sheet music because they can already play by ear, and that's kind of their rationalization. And you shouldn't avoid something just because it's challenging. And a lot of comments I get, it's like they don't even admit that and just say like I already know how to play by ear, so I don't need to learn to read sheet music. It's like and other comments I guess like just say every single note letter that you're playing in these tutorials. It's just ridiculous, right? So again, it goes back to this idea of challenge. We want to avoid stuff that is mentally difficult for us. And not to get too much into this topic, but James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, had a very good quote about, not quote, but he said something about this, where it's like we're operating in modern times with ancient software. So just if you think back then, if you did anything mentally strenuous, you would end up getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. But you have to realize today, your natural gut instinct is to not do anything challenged. You can't listen to that. Okay, that's like a survival mechanism. Other reason why they don't want to do sheet music is thanks to other teachers, like I mentioned before, they make everything way too complicated, too many homework assignments, too many written assignments, too much theory. And just realize that there's no shortcut. Okay. I'm not saying, and by the way, I'm not saying that playing by ear is bad. It's just you shouldn't let that stop you from learning how to read sheet music. Okay, now let's talk about what makes sheet music difficult. And these are the three things. And I'll give you a pro tip at the end to help you with all this. So the first thing is visual tracking. The second is sensory overload. And the other one is there's no clear timetable. So let's start with visual tracking. And this is the biggest challenge. It's like 90% of all lessons are pretty much this issue right here. And it's just visually tracking the notes with your eyes. And you see here, this is kind of like if you've ever seen Sesame Street. I don't know if that's still around. I'm pretty old, okay? I wonder if that's still here. I think that's still here, right? Big Bird and all that. If you ever sang some of the songs, they would have something like this where you following the bouncing ball. Follow me, I'm the bouncing ball, right? Like when you're singing along with music. So think about this. Even as kids, we had to use the ball to follow along with the words. If you go to sheet music, there's not even words. It's like some kind of weird hieroglyphic slash symbols or something like that too. So it's even more difficult than even just singing in the first place for kids. Think about that. So that's what makes it very difficult. It's not natural at all. This is like one of the most unnatural things to learn is to visually use your eyes to track each note. And even a lot of experienced students, even like concert pianists, like let me give you a story here. We will get not that I'm a concert pianist, but they'll get lost in the music too if they're playing with sheet music. So this is kind of embarrassing, but I think it's a good example. Remember back when I was in college, where I met my wife, who was also a piano major, and we run the piano studio together. So she had a duet, piano duo, I think is what you call it, where you have two people on one piano playing at the same time. So her and her partner, right? And we were doing a concert, like an official concert, people paying to see them play. And I was the page turner. And I remember there was this one point where I noticed she kept looking at me at the corner of her eye. She was like, she's kind of whispering to me something. I had no idea. I was like, huh, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, the music just stopped. And then her partner kind of just slowly took his hands off the keys and he flipped the page. It was awkward because I totally missed the page turn. So even at that level, okay, like I've been playing music for a long time. It's like even we can tend to get lost in sheet music. If you're doing this at home, like understand it is very, very, very difficult. So I do not underestimate this challenge at all. I know how difficult it is, just even at my level. So for kids, I have to be even more understanding of that. And especially if you're a beginner too, or even if you're experienced in learning sheet music for the first time, just it's going to be a lot of patience until you get to the point where you can automatically track each note with your eyes. Like I mentioned before, music notes are very foreign. We're not used to we're used to words. We're not used to symbols. It's like learning to code. Okay, but let me tell you what the solution is. And what I use at piano lessons. This is like 99% of all that I do at lessons. Okay, so like people pay me to just point to each note with this. Okay, this is all I use. Literally, for the longest time, if a beginning student, we might do this for months, maybe even like half a year, maybe even an entire year, just pointing to each note and helping them follow along with the notes. And that's it. That's really all you need to do. And trust me when I tell you this, like no teacher is going to use this because before we talked about they make things overcomplicated. They don't think a complicated solution or a complicated problem like or something as complex as reading sheet music can have such a simple solution. But this is pretty much it. Okay. Just this is all you need to do. Now, how do you do this when you're at home? Well, I hope you have a teacher who would be open-minded to helping you with this at the lesson as well. But if you want to learn this at home, all you really do is get a recording or a video, like whatever, like listen along with the music that you're practicing and just trace each note with your finger. That is really it. If you could do this easily, then the next challenge would be to not trace it with your finger, but just follow along with your eyes. And if you're keeping track, then you're off. You're gonna get there. Okay. Now the other thing is sensory overload. There's a lot of information. So think about all the things you need to pay attention to. And I'm not saying to pay attention to all of this at first. You shouldn't, right? But we have what time signature, key signature, dynamics, articulation, phrasing. There's a lot of stuff in here. And look, we have rests and what notes they are, the note value itself. So when a beginning student looks at this right here, I know that it looks more like this to them. Okay. So the same thing with yourself. Like, are you telling yourself like you need to do everything? Because you shouldn't. And this is just like on the information. Like, look at all these notes, right? Even here, this looks like this. Like seriously. And you come down here. We're not even talking about the sheet music itself. Think of all the senses that are involved in playing piano. That even just musicians like playing musical instruments. We have auditory, our sense of sound. We have visual, like looking, and then we have kinesthetic, which is basically our physical actions. Okay, coordination. And even if you think about, technique, it's not just fingers, we have knuckles, we have your wrists you have to pay attention to, your elbow, your shoulder, all of that is in play. It's almost like you play with your whole body, to be honest, okay? So just understand you cannot do everything at one time. So if you have difficulty with, playing sheet music or trying to learn, this might have been one of the problems, is trying to do everything at once. So instead, just simplify the process, work on one thing at a time. And we're going to talk about this more later when we get into my actual method that I show students. But this is basically the sequence you should follow. First is focusing on finger numbers only, like, each finger has a number. Then you can go on to trying to just read the notes by itself without use of finger numbers. And then one of the final challenges, I mean, there's more besides that, but at the rudimentary level would just be notes and rhythm. And that's it. Now, the other thing is that there's no clear timetable. You don't just level up consistently. That's the hard thing about sheet music. Okay, it's like exponential. There's like sudden jumps, right? Like think about when you were a kid. I mean, I don't know if you still are a kid, but if you're a kid watching this, good for you. But we would have these things called growth spurts, right? There's all of a sudden we grow some kids, man, I get jealous. I wish I was taller. Some of them would come back to school and they're like a foot taller already, right? So that is what sheet music is like. Again, it's not incremental. It doesn't go up slowly. All of a sudden, it's like you do something after a while, then bam, like you're fluent in it, okay? So what you should do, it's like suddenly clicking. That's a good way to think about it as well. So with this, do not focus on the results because that'll drive you crazy. It's not something you can control. You cannot control how fast you're going to get fluent. I mean, you can control the effort. That definitely does have an impact on that. The more you practice and you do it the right way, of course, if you have the right strategy, the right plan, of course, that's going to help speed it up. But all you should really do is focus on time spent. And what I mean is like, did you show up and did you do a minimum amount of time for you to spend on sheet music practice? Just consistent daily practice, the amount of time, that's it. Okay. And the hard thing is that sheet music is learned rather than taught, because I can show a student the way and we can learn as much as possible at the lesson, but it's going to be up to them when they exit my studio what they do at home. They have to learn it themselves, and that's kind of hard. I mean, but that's why lessons are so good. Okay, now I'll give you one pro tip. When you are doing something like this, really anything that you're learning for the first time, especially something as difficult as sheet music, is start with music you know. Okay, you want to try to make it as easy as possible. Like we talked about before, we're trying to do everything at once. That's making things as hard as possible for yourself. So another way to make things easy, the challenge should come later. Like now you just want to be accurate and make as much progress as possible. So start with music you know. And here's a picture. This is Picasso's bull, right? So if you look at it, some people like they think they just I don't know. There was a meme the other day that I saw. It's like a very normal one, like a common one, but it's like people just think like, oh, it's just a blank sheet, then all of a sudden it's a bull. Okay, it doesn't go like 0 to 100. So you see all these different frameworks he's using to draw a bull. Like here, it just starts off like a little stick figure, right? So in essence, that's what you're doing. Okay, giving yourself a familiar framework. So if you know a song already, then you don't have to worry about like what does it sound like, what is the rhythm like. You can just focus on reading the notes. Like for instance, like a lot of students, and this is why I don't recommend you start with classical music, because classical music doesn't have words. Like we grow up with words, and what's a song that we know from scratch from like ever since you're a little kid? It's Happy Birthday. Like whenever we get to Happy Birthday or other songs, even something like Hedwig Steen, right? The students have no problem learning that song. It's because they know it so well. If they know it really well, then you don't have to you don't have to worry about like what is the form or structure. Like you know what it sounds like, and whether you can sing on pitch is another another thing. But don't worry about that because we're just playing piano. You don't have to sing. But yeah, so you have all this stuff in your subconscious, and that allows yourself more mental concentration to just work on reading sheet music. And then eventually reading sheet music becomes subconscious, and then you can go on to higher challenges. Now, that's it for this section. Let's go on to concepts. I'm going to talk about concepts before we get to the actual method. These concepts will enhance your understanding of sheet music and will also help you understand why things are so difficult as well. Okay, because I mean, we talked about like, what makes sheet music difficult, all this stuff too. So this is just taking you to another level. Okay. No, if you weren't clear about before, like why things are difficult, then this is going to make things crystal clear. Now, one idea is transfer, and transfer is a concept that I first read about in this book, Ultra Learning by Scott Young. And it basically explains the process of how long it takes for, let's say, one skill to transfer to another field, right? So this is the best way to think about this. It's like all the stuff that you learn in school does not transfer to real life. Okay? Unless you use like real world experience, you get real hands-on action. So it's kind of like, let's say you're learning a foreign language, and I've noticed this because I do love languages. It's like learning languages is one of my side passions. So I'm talking from experience here. So it's like what will happen for me. I always started with, say, learning as much vocabulary as possible. And what happens after a while, you memorize all the vocabulary, and then that doesn't mean you're going to be able to use it in real life. So there's some time, there's a little bit of time that it takes for you to actually start to use words in real life. So it's like when you're getting better at a language, you'll start to try to practice a little bit, then all of a sudden, oh, that word, it pops up, and then you're able to use it. So that's kind of like, that's why I'm telling you to watch the last video, because vocabulary is like learning each individual note, and then the speaking is like doing sheet music. So the vocabulary will transfer over to what you're speaking. The music notes will transfer to sheet music. Okay. So yeah, like I said, so this is why you need to supplement your practice. Flashcards, pretty awesome, really simple, a lot simpler than what I'm going to show you here. The other concept is proceduralization, when something sticks, right? When a skill becomes autopilot. And this explains why there's no clear timetable, because there's a lot of different pieces we mentioned, like, all the information sensory overload, as well as all the different senses you need to know. Like all these different pieces have to start to lock into place. But this is the basic sequence that I get my students to go through. So first is just focusing on finger numbers, then note letters, then we go to rhythm. Then beyond that is patterns of notes. It's like when their understanding gets a little bit more sophisticated, then they can understand entire sections. And then the final thing would be to understand form and structure. But this is more of an advanced analysis. And a lot of my students, to be frank, don't even get to that level. Okay. But this is definitely a level where most concert pianists are at. They don't look at each note, they just understand the form and structure. Okay. Yeah, so again, this is why you don't do everything at once. It's got to go through this sequence until you can just stay at one level for a while. Next up is the levels of competence. And if you've ever wondered why learning can feel so frustrating, this explains it. So we start for the bottom level, which is unconscious incompetence. It's like you don't even know how bad you are. Conscious incompetence, now you understand how much you suck, right? Conscious competence, now you understand the things you're doing well. And unconscious competence means you're basically doing everything well at a subconscious level. So this is what makes it so frustrating. Each time you level up, let's say you're going from beginner to the next level, to the next level, to intermediate, to the next level, to like advanced, to like God level, whatever you want to call it. You have to start over from the bottom. Okay. Like, and each time you level up, it's not like you have to go from the complete bottom. Like you might just go to conscious incompetence. But the thing is, you do have to start over. And that's what feels frustrating. So you need to expect it. Going back to our idea where we think it's just going to be like this, it's like learning is really just going straight, and there's a dip. You feel like you're not going, you're actually getting worse for a while. Then there's another peak, you get better. And then you feel like you're just plateauing, you're not getting better. And then you go through it again. So again, it's just like my little air drawing here, right? You go straight, you go down, a dip, peak, straight, dip, peak, and on and on. That is basically the learning process, infinite, okay? And then, like I said, when does it stop? Probably when you get to concert repertoire level, but that's like the highest level. It's going to take like 10 years, okay? And I alluded to why concert pianists can learn 10 times faster. Well, I didn't allude to it. I'm saying for the first time. It's because it's pattern recognition. They've literally seen every single type of pattern known to mankind. So there's really nothing new at that level. They've done everything. And even if they learn a new piece of music they're not familiar with, it's going to fit a framework of something that they did before. Okay. Lastly is the plateau of latent potential. This is a hard one because you got to figure out for yourself. Like no one can judge it unless you come to one of my lessons. I could tell you if you're actually at a plateau, or if you actually hit a wall. Okay, so this is what's going to feel like. You might feel stuck, like you hit a wall, and again, you might have actually hit a wall. Okay, But the thing is, you might be close to a breakthrough. So don't be like this guy. You're like 1 inch away from pay dirt. Okay. Sometimes you just need to keep going at it, and then it will stick, and then you will be fluent in sheet music. And other times, maybe you're not actually doing it the right way, and you're wasting your time. This is very hard for a person to figure out. I can't really give you advice. Like, you just have to figure it out for yourself. Okay. Although one strategy is to give yourself, let's say, a minimum amount of time or a maximum amount of time. Let's say, like, oh, I'm at this level. I'm going to give myself a week to work on it, or maybe even a month. By the end of this month, if I have not made improvement and have not broken through to the next level, then yeah, you're probably at a wall. Okay. Now, with that all out of the way, let's talk about the actual method itself. We're going to talk about materials and the procedure, the direction. So the materials, like the last video I mentioned, keyboard guide, which helps you locate the notes, flashcards, which helps you transfer. Again, remember the learning concept of transfer. School to real world life doesn't really work, right? But in this case, if you keep doing flashcards, those individual notes, going to help you to read and play sheet music better. And then lastly, you want to get the Faber Studio collection. I mentioned this in the last video, but it's because it's progressive. So you can find a level that is appropriate for you, because your playing level might not match your reading ability. So what I mentioned in the last video is you want to start at the easiest level if you're not, if you have no experience with like sheet music, even whatever level you're at, because you can start with like 5-finger positions where you're in a locked position where you don't need to think about moving. So remember, just making these as easy as possible. So if you don't have to move your hands, that it makes reading sheet music that much easier. And then you can just start to level up from there. Okay. So if you're able to do like intermediate or advanced, you just kind of have to bite your tongue. You have to get rid of your ego and understand, just because you play at a certain level doesn't mean you're going to be able to read at a certain level. Now, here's the procedure. We just start with finger numbers. If you don't know what the finger numbers are, here they are. Okay. So we count from the thumb. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to the pinky. Same thing in the right hand. So that's the good thing, is that these never change, because if you get experience with music, you understand a lot of rules that you learn today are just going to not exist in the future. Okay. So a lot of rules just change over time and kind of disappear as well. So this is going to be the most tedious part. So, and this is also why I told you to start with 5-finger positions, so you can limit your range, because you don't want to just go up and down the keyboard. That's insane. That's going to be overwhelming. So what you do is, with your music, when you're in a fixed finger position, you're gonna know which finger goes on which note. And what you basically do is just go over every treble clef note on top of the notes, write in the number. Same thing for the bass clef notes. And this is kind of like just giving yourself the answer, making it easy as possible. So in the beginning, you just focus on playing. And you don't even have to know consciously, oh, this is an E, or this is a G, or this is an A, because it's just about getting as much action as possible. Because if you take as much action, you might not even need to consciously like tell yourself what the letters are. You might even learn it on a subconscious level, because at my stage, it's not like I look at a note and be like, oh, that's an A, that's a G. I just like, oh, it's just that note. Okay. So start with easy 5-finger positions. And like I said, don't need to identify notes consciously. Now, the next level after that is note letter recognition. This comes after, let's say, when this becomes super easy. The way you can tell that this is becoming very easy is like you're not even consciously thinking about it anymore. You're playing the correct note and you're being very accurate with the notes that you're playing, and your rhythm as well. Okay, so if you score yourself like a 10 out of 10 on getting the notes correct as well as getting correct rhythm, then you can kind of move on to the next level. So the next challenge would be going, maybe even staying at this level. Like, you don't have to try out the next level to do this. Okay. So picking another book at the same level you're at and writing no finger numbers. And by the way, I forgot to mention, when you're doing this, you have the keyboard guide out. So you're making sure that you know which note you're playing correctly. Accuracy is very important. So put the keyboard guide on the instrument as well. Then, so you have the keyboard guide on, but you're not writing finger numbers. Then when that becomes easy, remember the levels of competence. When you go all the way up to unconscious competence, then you can take away the keyboard guide. Okay. And then remember, that's not do or die. Like, you can back up a step or two, like when necessary. In fact, this happens a lot with my students as well. And then, the final challenge is to do all of that. No finger numbers, no keyboard guide, and pretty much getting in the rhythm perfectly. And then from there, you just pick the next level. And like I said, Faber Studio Collection is excellent because you just get better. The difficulty is incremental, just like one little baby step at a time. So you don't have to deal with like huge jumps or huge challenges. Now, I'll give you some strategies to get you even more results from this. First one we're going to talk about is 80-20 rule, then interleaving, then another pro tip. So the 80-20 rule, it's basically just doing 80% of a certain activity and 20% of another. Because in my experience, like a split doesn't really work too well, like 50-50. It's like you make progress, but it's just so slow that I mean, unless you have patience for days, right? But it's slow progress. You can get better like 1-2% a week, and that might be okay with people who have infinite patience, but it could be kind of demoralizing. Okay, so instead you're gonna do 80-20. So in the beginning, you're gonna do 80% flashcards. Again, watch the previous video, and then 20% of your time is going to be actually practicing sheet music. Then when you get better, you can reverse the equation. So then it becomes 80% sheet music, then 20% flashcards. And then after a while, it's just 100% sheet music. You don't even need flashcards, okay? So you just keep repeating this at every level. So let's say at the easy level, 80 flashcards, 20 sheet music. Then you switch it to 80 sheet music, 20 flashcards. When you level up, you start it over. 80 flashcards, 20 sheet music, and then you just keep doing that over and over again. And here is an even better tip. At the macro, so let's thinking micro is just like doing reading sheet music, and at the macro level, think about the difficulty of music that you're doing. So it's kind of like another pie on top of this, if that makes any sense. So then on top of, let's say, doing 80% flashcards, 20% sheet music, you can do 80% of whatever your current level music is, and then 20% the next level of music. And this is what I do all the time in piano lessons. Like if a student has graduated, let's say from like the easy level, I don't just make them do the next level. We don't just jump into it. We'll pick another book at the same level, but I'll also get a book at a higher level. So we'll still mainly do their current level and then a little bit of the next level. It's kind of like dipping your toe in the water before you jump in the entire pool. Okay. So this will enhance your progress even further. Next up, interleaving, which is just mixing up various but related activities. It's like doing sports. Let's say you do some soccer, tennis, basketball, football, on and on, right? And this is how I read books. I'm usually reading, people don't believe me when I say this, but I read like 5 books at the same time. So when I get bored with one book, I can switch to another, switch to another, switch to another. And if I wanted to, like I don't have time, but if I had free time in the world, trust me, I could read like 3-6 hours a day. Okay. Because of this approach, because I have so many different, I don't just stick with one book. It gets kind of dull after a while. You switch to different materials. So you should also do this with the music that you're practicing. Not only at different levels, like let's say, okay, so let's say if you stay at the same level, you can do different genres, which is why, again, Faber Studio Collection is a really good choice because they have Christmas, they have classical, popular, all different genres to choose from. But you can also do different, we already talked about genres, right? But also different difficulty levels, which I talked about here, right? This one right here. So not only doing easy music, but doing intermediate and then advanced. And then you can also just mess around with the ratios and find something that is fun for you. Now, pro tip. We'll be talking about earlier with Picasso's bowl. Let's say you've moved beyond sheet music, then the next level of thinking would be to try to do a higher level playing like dynamics, articulation, and phrasing. Start this with an easier book. So let's say you get all the way to intermediate level and sheet music reading is no problem. That you can read completely fluently. If you're gonna do things like dynamics, articulation, and all that stuff, like higher musical principles, do it at a lower level. And this is cool because you can still practice the music at the level you're at, but introduce all these concepts at a lower, easier level. And what's neat is that if you do this for a while, again, it starts to transfer. I mentioned that before, right? It's what you learn at the easier level starts to transfer at the current level. Okay. And if you want to speed up this process even further, do it with music you've already learned, like you've already practiced, you already know like the back of your hand. Okay. And besides all of this, like you have to refer to the right sources because like how do you know if you're doing it the right way? It has to do with feedback. And the only correct feedback you can get are actual videos and audio recordings. And if you go to my website, I have an entire guide that you can download for free. It's the entire Faber Studio collection. I have recorded every single video. So whatever you practice in that entire collection from beginner all the way to advanced, there's a recording on my other YouTube channel that you could use it for study. Okay, and it also gives you a benchmark to show you like how good you're getting, right? Or it's like, oh, I should be able to play like this before I move on to the next level. And thankfully, all my videos are on YouTube. It's totally free. Download my guide. If you do, you go to the YouTube video. You can also change the playback speed. And what's cool, this is a feature that I found out recently, which is nifty. You can actually zoom in now. So you can pinch and zoom in on the video. You might be like, yeah, I already know about that, dummy. But anyway, it's going to help your practice even further because let's say a lot of these advanced videos that you're watching, like the fingers look small because you got to cover the entire range of the keys. Well, if you're having a hard time looking at the notes or the keys, you can just zoom in on it and then see it up close and personal, okay? Now, additional strategies before we end this video. This is going to enhance it even further, okay? So these all stack up on top of each other. And I like to think of these as different patterns. So learning as many patterns as possible, okay? So we have visual, which is sight reading, physical, which is technique, harmony, which is auditory. So with sight reading, this helps because sight reading examples are very short. So what this allows you to do is go through as many different patterns as possible. Well, if you're finishing as many problems and exercises as possible, the feedback loop is shorter. You're learning faster. So this becomes faster progress. And this is not in terms of like, this is not technique. This is in terms of like a visual, right? Reading sheet music, reading notes, that ability, okay? And this is and what's cool is like, you can autocorrect over time if you continue to use the flashcards, because let's say this is your introduction to doing sight reading, you're gonna miss a lot of notes in the beginning. But as long as you're following the correct process, eventually you're going to get everything 100%. And this is my recommended resource. This is what I use to help my students learn to sight read. And this really helps their note reading ability if they need it. And what's really good about this resource, and I recommend you do it this way, is there is audio that you can download with it. I don't know if it's a CD, but I think you can go to an actual link to download this. Because this is how I do it in the lessons. This is how I introduce students to reading, sight reading. I don't actually just point to a problem and tell them to play it. Like I play along with them all the time. Because if you play along with the notes in real time, you are hearing in real time, like, is it correct? Like, is the note correct? Is the rhythm correct? And it's like, let's say you don't even have to go back and play one exercise over and over again. Like you can go through the whole entire book and then you can start over at the beginning. Okay, this is an idea that's called spaced repetition. We'll talk about it in another video. But yeah, if you keep doing this over and over again, then it's going to have an effect on your note reading ability. Now, next up is technique, just physical. This is pretty straightforward. Just learning scales, arpeggios, chords, the most fundamental patterns of music in as many different keys as possible. So if you like do all of this, it's like you can potentially learn, let's say 80% of everything that's out there. Because if you think about everything from the beginning to the advanced level, it's basically a scale, arpeggio, or chord, and just rearrange in the different formats. Okay, so this will cut down your learning. The learning curve? Okay, so if you have your because a lot of times it's one of these that kind of holds people back from learning a song or a piece. It's because they can't understand it visually, they can't understand it physically, or let's say auditorily, like the harmony is not familiar, okay? So this is just designed for you to learn music as fast as possible as well, in addition to getting better at reading sheet music. And then harmony, auditory, this is also self-explanatory. This is basically listening ability. It's like, can you hear the certain chord progressions? Because you can get to a point where you're like, oh, that's like a seventh chord or a major seventh or something like that too. Pretty sophisticated, a little bit more advanced, but it's kind of like next level stuff, okay? Also doing stuff like transposition, which is taking certain songs or patterns and playing it at every single key. So let's say if you take Bach's famous Minuet in G, the good exercise is to play it in every single key, okay? And it also helps your technique as well. You can also do solfege, which is identifying each pitch. And what's cool is because if you practice this for a while, if you do a lot of listening, eventually it will transfer over to what you're hearing in the audio recordings, okay? Like, I don't know like how sophisticated it's gonna get, because even me, it's like I don't like hear and be like, oh, that's like a suspension chord or something like that too. But you can get there if you keep listening and you do a lot of this stuff, okay? So that's it for today's video. I will put all links to resources in the comments after this live stream is over. I hope you guys learned something today. If you did, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can check whenever I go live. If you got something out of this and you think someone else would benefit, share this video with them as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this today. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot. Happy practicing.